How are you doing? We are going to have a little chat about Mars and Pluto. There's a lot going around about Mars and Pluto right now because Mars is fresh in Scorpio. So we come out of our eclipse, we have our equinox, and Mars is entering into Scorpio and squaring Pluto. And this is part of a 2-year cycle between the planets Mars and Pluto. So archetypally, their relationship is quite heightened right now, and I want to talk about that, but also put it into perspective of how this is actually a closing stage in what's been unfolding for almost 2 years. Okay, so the last time that Mars was conjunct Pluto was in February of 2024 at 0 degrees of Aquarius. So part of the reason this first 2-year cycle is so heightened and important is because it's Mars working with a Pluto in Aquarius for this whole cycle, this 2-year cycle of Mars and Pluto. And when Mars and Pluto are talking to each other, it is an evolutionary moment because of how those archetypes relate to one another, what they mean. So I want to open this up a little bit. That's going to help contextualize what the heck is going on this week and in these times. And you will recall November 2024, perhaps that means something. That was when we had our first of 3 oppositions between Mars and Pluto. That Mars was in Leo and it was opposite Pluto in Aquarius, and Mars went on that retrograde, it went into Cancer, and we had 3 oppositions, the last of which was in April. And now Mars has moved ahead, it comes into its square with Pluto, and then it will start moving towards its conjunction, which will come in January of 2026. So we are literally entering these next few months, literally entering this next season, autumn here. You can see the leaves are changing very quickly because we are still very dry here, but we might be getting some rain, hopefully. Anyway, going back, so for these next few months, for this next season, we actually have something between the archetypes of Mars and Pluto finishing out. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about what those two mean to each other, and then go into this Mars and Scorpio in a little bit more detail. But this is, Mars is always related to Pluto. When we have the personal planets, there's an outer planet that they can relate to, and Mars represents our very personal drive. It is that active yang energy, traditionally that wants to be divine masculine, not the toxic patriarchal stereotypes that are all over Mars in so many places. Mars wants to be drive, how we have action-oriented meaning that becomes embodied and puts us out into the world somehow. Okay, world, whenever I say that, world can be 5 people, it can be 5 million people. It's not kind of the world, it has to be 5 million people coming up. It's just, in astrology, it really actually just means the role that we have to play in something that we're part of, okay? And Mars is how we want to have that active energy and being aware of it. And it is desire in a very personal ego way. When I use ego in that stance, it's a neutral construct of the self. When Mars is driven by fear, it's going into our kind of egoic, fear-driven place, which is going to have that spectrum of leaning towards full, what we would call clinical narcissism. Okay, and that is a Mars that is fear-driven and is really uncomfortable with it, with what active energy means for it to be embodied. And Pluto speaks to, transiting Pluto, speaks to this collective soul energy that is simultaneously working with us individually and collectively. And that's why when Pluto switches signs, we're still in the very beginning of Pluto and Aquarius. Sometimes we forget that. It's like, okay, we're here, we got it, we know it. No, we're talking about a 20-year cycle. We are just at the beginning. And the psyche is very much still transitioning out of the impact and transformations of Pluto and Capricorn at this time, as we're encountering and meeting Pluto and Aquarius energy, because it's a slow transition with Pluto. And Pluto being in Aquarius is bringing up, these collective themes that are always involving the meeting of the unconscious and it becoming conscious. Pluto works to make what's unconscious conscious for a process of evolution, and that process wants to be activated by an individual soul drive, not Mars ego drive. Soul drive, we do not mentally, it's not a mental construct. It's not something that we can just understand. That's why the archetypes are so helpful. And that is evolving into Aquarius, into new experiences of radical authenticity, into breaking boundaries in ways that ideally are able to create actual social justice, what that phrase means, what it wants to mean. That is about creating new experiences of society that are allowing this human project to become something that is very other than what it has been. And Pluto, transiting Pluto, speaks to power. It speaks to the old paradigms of power that a fear drive is going to keep manifesting. And then it speaks to the journey of consciousness awakening, becoming aware of how power can work, of what power with. For example, if we're working with the Aquarius collective paradigm, then we're talking about power with. We're talking about new organizations of social structures that allow actual equality to manifest, not because it's something that we should aspire to, but because it's built into the very way of social organization. Aquarius is also, and it's going to bring personal journeys of the soul archetypally coming into a new radical authenticity, a new understanding of what breaking with a status quo that isn't serving in one's own soul journey, and then how that ripples out into the collective and vice versa. So there's nothing simple about there's nothing simple about Pluto. There's nothing simple about transiting Pluto, but it is this evolutionary drive. And Mars is squaring that. And Mars in Scorpio is squaring that. So we had those three oppositions, which was really about Mars in Leo talking to that authentic soul drive. And there, especially on the journey of self-inquiry, we really see or saw, what does it even mean for me to be authentic? What does it mean for my heart's desire to not be actually driven to be validated? And it's so easy to say something is happening and I don't care what they think. I don't care. And we can say that. It's a very different thing to move with that as the most authentic fuel driving our creative actualization of self. And that was what that then Mars conversation was all about. Now that Mars moves on and it says in this moment of intense contact, it's not just about heart desire. In order for that heart desire to actually become something that is deep and embodied and moving me into relationship and evolution and understanding myself and those I'm in intimate connection with, understanding my connection to the world, that involves me having an active drive into my murky yin depths. And right away, there's going to be the consciousness that says, heck no, and wants to jump out of those depths. And when Mars does that, talking to Pluto, Mars is so afraid to look at what's coming up in the rumbling of its own scorpionic depths that it propels itself out and it projects all its own fear of itself and its own past and its own stories of intimacy and its own stories of betrayal and its own stories of being the one with too much power, all of those complicated journeys that we go on through in intimacy, and it projects it out. And when it's squaring Pluto, who's calling on a deep soul level archetypally for authentic action in mind, carrying out and creating new paradigms, it can be explosive, it can be just a heck of a lot of ego. It's gonna create a lot of chaos. When that Mars is getting curious about what's in those depths, when that Mars is saying, you know what, I am so ready to have different patterns and outcomes and trajectories in my life. I am so ready to be maybe even a little bit scared shitless about heading into something that's the unknown, because I also know I got to do it. I'm not going to project that fear outward. I'm not going to avoid what's here. I'm going to sit with it. Sitting with it is an active Mars in Scorpio, because it's not driven by fear. It's not trying to throw it out. It's not trying to act so quickly and projects out. It's not trying to get out of a situation. It's not in what's just so commonly referred to as fight or flight mode. It is with that intimacy of depth in oneself. And what happens as it lingers in there is it starts entwining with all these different tendrils of experience, and it's flowing and it's deep, and it's realizing that there's a rhythm down here, that there's a way of being down here, that, what do you know, there is so much creativity and there is so much power. But it's not that false power that was really driven by fear. It is this power that comes from being with the present moment, being truly with all the complicated, murky parts of myself that I've been taught not to show, being with another person, being vulnerable, the strength in vulnerability, being with intimacy with life, with another being, with our pasts, with our dreams, with Goddess, with the archetypes. Scorpio brings us into intimacy with all of that. And every time we do it, it's a death and a rebirth, because it's always transforming, and the self is always transforming, and the soul's journey is always transforming. And when Mars comes into that Scorpio, which we have until November to be journeying with, then it's able to meet that Plutonic call in a completely different way. And it's able to go forward, go deeper. It's really not a linear journey, but it is able to just awaken a little bit more. And with the Aquarius energy coming through, happening while there's a grand trine, because that's what the sun has brought us into at the start of Mars and Scorpio, there's synchronicities, there's relationships that can emerge, there's new ways of being in relationship, there's new experiences of intimacy, whether it's with someone for 5 minutes or someone you've known for 20 years. And it's unknown, because when Mars fully embraces the Scorpionic energy, it doesn't know what the outcome is going to be. Scorpio is an entirely experiential energy. Air can glimpse, and water can absolutely intuit, but it's not intuiting a mental construct, as air often wants. It's not intuiting exactly how we predict the amount of money that will be made, or this will happen, which earth and air can work. It's feeling into intuition, which brings us into a different plane, which brings us into different identity, which brings us into different relationship. And we are going to journey with Mars through Scorpio, and then we're going to move towards that culminating conjunction with Pluto in 2026. And we're going to have completed our first relationship cycle between Mars and Pluto. And then we're going to start again. Remembering that in this version, we work with a spiral of these cycles. There is awakening, you know, there is awakening. There is every cycle taking us through, and yet we can glimpse something that we've lived through before, but we're going to see it differently. You know, that's how the cycles are working with our consciousness that's growing, that's evolving. And that's all about Pluto, and it's all about, in Mars, our personal desires. But these are desires that, especially when talking to Pluto, they want to be aligning to that collective call that Pluto and Aquarius is bringing us into, and that is a paradigm shift. And the more that there is resistance and clinging to the old, and the more that Mars is afraid at this moment to look down into the depths of oneself, it's all going to get projected outward. And part of everyone's work is to also recognize when that projection is coming onto us. And we turn away, we sidestep, we get out of the way, and we go sit with our intimacy with ourselves. And we look at what the heck is coming up. And just looking at it, this is the beauty. Just looking at it is the alchemical practice of yielding gold. We don't actually have to do anything with it. We have to be with it. And the water is going to find where it needs to flow, and that is the transformation, is when we sit with it and we watch it and we see what's emerging in ourselves and all the layers, and it's this shifting mosaic, and it's where there's a lot of juice, a lot of juicy, good, witchy swirling around in there. Mars and Scorpio is it. Okay. There's some thoughts, reflections into the Mars-Pluto cycle that there's a heck of a lot out there about. So here's a little from me. Send in love. See you soon. Bye.